Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, if you have a hubcap, go ahead and remove all of your little covers and then your 19mm lug nuts. Now that we have the wheel off, we have a nice clear view of our brakes. We're just going to go ahead and spray down the rotor with some penetrant to help relieve it from the wheel bearing. Now we can let that sit and let's move along to the caliper itself. Now for the caliper, what we need to do is we need to push in the piston. The piston is located inside of here, and it basically goes inside of this area. To do this, I'm just going to use a small pry bar. We'll carefully get in between the caliper and the rotor itself and gently start pulling it in this direction. That'll push in the piston. When you do this, it's a good idea to do it slowly. There we are. Now we can move along to our two 14mm headed caliper slider bolts. Let's remove the pair. Now we can remove the caliper from the vehicle. The next thing you want to do is pay attention to this area along here. This is your caliper boot. You want to make sure you don't see any fluid coming out of here, and you also want to make sure you don't see any tears. Either way, if you saw fluid or a tear, you're going to have to go ahead and replace the caliper. Assuming it looks good, let's continue on by hanging it so it's putting no pressure on our rubber flex hose. Now it's going to be time to remove the pads from the caliper bracket. We'll continue with our small pry bar and carefully pry these out. Typically, I like to give them a good inspection just to see if it looks like they're wearing oddly. At this point, we can continue on to our two 15mm headed bolts that hold the caliper bracket to the knuckle. I'm going to leave this one in here a couple threads, fully remove the second. Remove your bracket. We'll give this a quick inspection. We're going to have a closer look in a minute. Go ahead and set this aside. Now it's going to be time to get the rotor off of here. If yours is rusted in position like ours is, just continue on with one of your original lug nuts. We're going to put it on one of these studs a few good threads, making sure that it's still nice and loose. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get the rotor off of here. If yours is rusted like ours is, you're going to have to use a hammer. But if you're going to be reusing the rotor, make sure you don't hit on the braking surface. I'm going to be replacing my brakes anyway. Remove your rotor. Now at this point, you're going to want to clean up the mating surface of the wheel bearing where your brand new brakes are going to ride. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and coat the bearing surface with some copper never sees. Let's clean down our rotor braking surface. Go ahead and turn it over, do the exact same thing. Now we can place this on our wheel bearing. It's a good idea to use a lug nut to hold it in place. Now it's going to be time to clean up our caliper bracket. To do this, you want to remove both of your slider pins. I'm just going to take this, I'll hold the boot, and I'm going to start pulling the pin right out of it. Now I want to show you this slider pin. Looking at the end of it, you're going to find a vibration dampener. It's a little rubber grommet. Pay attention to that because you want to make sure you reinsert it into the proper side of the caliper bracket. Let's leave it right here. We'll go ahead and remove this one. Wipe it off. And you can tell it does not have a vibration dampener. Like I said, it's important to remember where everything goes. Now let's take off our tins. I'm just going to come right in between the bracket and the tin and gently pry it off. These are metal, so of course we can recycle them. The next thing we'll do is continue by removing the caliper slider boots. To do this, you can carefully get in between the caliper bracket and the boot and gently separate the two, being careful not to damage the boot. Once you have it off of there, you want to give it a close inspection. You want to make sure it's still soft and pliable, and it's not torn or worn or damaged in any way. Now we're going to go ahead and clean that out. To do that, I'm just going to use a clean rag, and I'll slide it right on through. You never want to use any type of solvent on this because it could potentially damage the boot. I'm just going to work the boot around a little bit, rubbing it on the rag that's on the inside. We'll give it another quick inspection. Assuming that one looks good, we'll set it aside and do the exact same thing to the other one. Now, once we're done with the slider boots, we're going to continue on to the slider pins themselves. The areas that you want to pay attention to, firstly, is right here. This groove is where that boot's going to sit. And if it's full of dirt, it's going to make it so moisture can make its way in and rust up the entire slider pin. Also, you want to pay attention to the smooth surface of the slider pin. You want to make sure it doesn't look like it's rusted, rotted, or damaged in any way, in which case it might cause restriction. Just going to go ahead and wipe this down. And now I'm going to take this to a wire brush, and I'm going to go ahead and clean up this area. I have both slider pins cleaned up. We can set those aside. Now let's continue on to cleaning the caliper bracket. There's 4 areas on the bracket that you want to pay attention to for sanding. We want to make sure we get inside this entire ear, this ear, and then the exact same thing on the other side of the bracket. Now, once you have both sides of the bracket done, we're going to continue on by cleaning up each of the slider ports. To do this, you want to be over a nice collection receptacle. We're going to carefully spray some parts cleaner in. Be careful because it will want to spray back out. Now I'm going to use a bore brush to clean the insides. I'll give it a rinse, once again being very careful for spray back. Now let's let this fully dry. Once it's dry, it's time to continue with some high temperature caliper lubricant. We're going to go along each of the areas that we went ahead and sanded down. Now let's continue on with our caliper tins. Just go ahead and rest it in place and press it down till it's locked in. Give it a wiggle to make sure it's 100% secure. We'll do the same on the other side. Let's continue with that high temperature caliper lubricant. We're going to go right inside this port. Now I can take one of my caliper slider boots. We're going to take this and we're going to slide it right in there. Do the same to the other. Time to lubricate the slider pins. You want to make sure you lubricate the entire shaft. It's very important to make sure that this functions properly, otherwise your brakes won't function well. While we're lubricating this, you also want to make your way all the way up into the groove that I told you to make sure to clean. This is going to help keep moisture out of the area, which is very important. We'll go ahead and slide that right into the proper slider port. This is the one that had the vibration dampener, so I'm making sure that I put it inside the original port that I had removed it from. Now once I have it in there, I just like to wipe down the grease a little bit, and then I'm just going to work it around. That feels good. Do the same to the other side. All the way up into that groove. You're going to want to make sure that you clean your mounting bolts for the caliper bracket and apply a thin amount of red thread locker. After that, we can go ahead and get the bracket into position. Let's slide it right on over the rotor and line up the holes with the knuckle. We'll start in both of these mounting bolts, snug them up, and then we'll torque each of them to 85 foot-pounds. Now we can move along to dealing with the brake pads. Now for the brake pads, you want to make sure that it does have the wear indicator on it. Typically the wear indicator is going to be on the inboard pad on the bottom. So all you want to do is just take a wear indicator and you're going to put it right into the groove. Now we can take that pad and we're going to put it in position into the caliper bracket. Now you're just going to want to make sure that it can move around easily inside here. If you had to force it in or even use a hammer, typically that means that you did not clean up the caliper bracket well enough. Go ahead and put on the outboard pad. The outboard pad will not have a wear indicator. Next, it's going to be time to deal with the caliper itself. Typically, I like to use a nice brass brush, and I'm just going to go ahead and clean this down. I want to make sure that there isn't any rust buildup on this that might cause a braking issue. When you're doing this, you also want to make sure you get the back side of each of these ears. Now we'll continue on with a little bit more high temperature caliper lubricant. The areas that we're going to use this is right along the metallic aspect of the piston here, right in the center. Once you have that well coated, we're going to move along to the backside of each of these ears. All this is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now we can take the caliper and we're going to put it right on over the brake pads. You also want to make sure that it slides over the pins properly. Now we can put in our caliper slider bolts. Once they're in, go ahead and bottom them out and then torque each of them to 25 foot-pounds. We'll use our 14mm to snug these. Now we can get this lug nut off of here. Now we'll put the wheel back on. Start on all 4 of our 19mm lug nuts, bottom them out, get the wheel safely back down on the ground, and then we'll torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Of course, if you had a hubcap, go ahead and put that on now. Pay attention to this area on the hubcap. That's the area where your valve stem needs to go. We'll get this lined up, and now we can go ahead and tighten up all of our lug covers. Okay friends, we got one side of the brakes done. Of course, you're going to want to make sure you do the other side of the car as well. When you do that, the process is going to be the exact same thing. After that, go ahead and hop inside the passenger compartment and pump up that brake pedal till it's nice and firm. Make your way under the hood and double check your master cylinder. You want to make sure that the .3 brake fluid is up to par. After that, close it down and then take it for a road test. Thank you for watching.